Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel. I know you're going to really enjoy this story tonight. I particularly love it. It's a story about Bigfoot being sick and this young girl actually looked after him. And it's an amazing story and I think you're really going to enjoy it. So let's get started. But before we do, make sure you subscribe to the channel because I've got amazing stories out there. And who doesn't need a good story? Let's get started. Dear Sarah, hello Sarah and all your listeners. I literally cannot wait to tell you my Bigfoot story because it is something I have never personally shared with anyone, apart from my husband of course, who 100% believes my account of the day because he knows I'm not given to telling lies. I currently work in law and so I do appreciate your discretion in keeping my name out of the story. I will be making up my name to protect myself and others in the story. So let's just pretend my name is Lily. Anyway, my story happened in the 80s. Seems like a whole world away now. I loved growing up in the 80s. It was a good time to be young. When I was 13 years old, my father and mother decided to go abroad. They were to visit relatives in Ireland, reunite with friends in England, and then they were all going together on a safari in the Serengeti Game Reserve in Kenya. In the 80s, going abroad was a big deal, not like it is now. They were all incredibly excited, but the question was what to do with me. Was I to come along? No was the answer. I still needed to go to school. It was decided that I would go and stay on my uncle's farm in Colorado. I was very excited because my uncle's farm was amazing and incredibly beautiful, and there were acres upon acres of untouched land to explore. Who would not be thrilled? It was decided that my uncle's wife Claire would homeschool me while my parents were away. I still remember the day I arrived at the farm and was introduced to Sinbad, the beautiful cinnamon horse with a black mane and long black tail. We both just connected immediately, and I would spend countless hours with him after schoolwork, washing him down with a hose, shampooing him and grooming him. Every time I had free time, Sinbad and I would go riding all over my uncle's farm. We had so much fun together, and I could tell Sinbad was really warming to me. We had a great connection. I'd always loved animals all my life, and I've been known to nurse so many animals back to health. In Houston, where my parents lived, or still live, I have saved the odd bird that had fallen out of its nest too soon, and rescued kittens that were halfway drowned and fed them with a syringe until they were old enough to eat solids. The vet would call me the miracle worker, and would always ask me to nurse any sick animal that came into his surgery if I was willing to. Yes, you've guessed it, I never ever said no, not once. Because I've always loved animals and always will. I still rescue animals today, sometimes on a larger scale like bear cubs who lost their mother or even a mountain lion cub. I've done it all, believe me. They say that animals sense your nature, and I think it's true because even my friends over the years who had dogs that were reluctant to greet strangers, their dogs were never insecure around me, and it was always commented about. Why do my dogs love me so much, Lily, they would say. Anyway, back to my story. Let us just talk about the day that I met the hairy monster that people call Bigfoot or Sasquatch. It was a beautiful sunny day. I remember it as clearly as if it was yesterday. The sun was warming my back as Sinbad and I trotted across the valley and past fields of sage into the thicker areas of forest where there was a lot of dry fall. On this particular day, I noticed that Sinbad was not being himself. He just refused to move forward anymore. And I tried to encourage him to walk forwards, but he just wouldn't. In fact, his ears went back, and he got back on his hind legs in a defensive pose and returned around and bolted off. Now, Sinbad had never run off on me. I was now standing in a thicker area of brush with more trees quite a way away from the farmhouse. I looked around to see what had scared my horse so badly. Was it a rattlesnake, or could it have been a bear or some kind of feline cat wandering around? I was not sure, nor was I afraid. I just had a strange feeling come over me that something needed my help. Every time I had stumbled across a stray animal needing my help in the past, I had instinctively started to look for it as if something was guiding me to help it. On this occasion, that very same feeling overcame me. I started surveying the area, looking for something that was abandoned by its mother or had become hurt in some way. I was expecting to find something small hiding in the grass, but I was about to find something that I would have never imagined in my wildest nightmares. Yes, you guessed it. I found Bigfoot. I heard this low moaning sound. It was a guttural, throaty sound, but it was much more like a whimpering sound rather than a growl. It was the sound I would identify as agonizing pain. Then I found the creature. It was lying inside an abandoned and rusting trailer, and it had completely covered itself with grass and twigs and branches. The first thing I noticed when I approached it was the most revolting sulfur-like smell that you get from someone who's been farting a lot, only much, much worse than that. I could also smell feces and urine. The creature was covered with grass so much that I could not make it out at all. It was probably for that reason that I approached it boldly. I could see how scared and terrified their eyes were as they looked at me. It looked incredibly vulnerable. For a moment I mistook this creature for a bear cub because it was not that big. But when I brushed the grass off its body, I got the shock of my life. I was looking at a creature of about 4 foot in height, but its proportions were very big. I guessed he was still a youngster, but I'd never seen anything like him before. I did wonder where his parents were and why it seemed that he had been abandoned. What was he, I thought? I'd never seen anything like him before. He was definitely not human, and yet there was a humanity to his features, if you know what I mean. I noticed that there were feces sticking to the animal's coat as well as pieces of vomit. The animal groaned and held his stomach really tightly and winced. He also started to retch, and the most horrible greenish vomit came out of his mouth. He no longer seemed afraid. I think he could sense I wanted to help him, and I certainly did. I knew he was communicating with me and telling me his stomach hurt. He might have food poisoning, I thought. Maybe a viral infection, or possibly just a normal infection, I wasn't sure. I knew a little bit about veterinary medicine, having worked with a vet on several occasions. I knew antibiotics were great, but they didn't work on viruses, and I knew that with food poisoning, animals were often given charcoal to absorb the poison. I was not sure what was wrong with this creature, yet I knew I could not tell my uncle about him, especially because he was an unknown species, and I wanted to help this animal on my own. I spoke to him in a gentle, reassuring voice, and even tried to wipe some of the feces and vomit off his fur. He did not seem to mind me touching him. On the contrary, my touch was so comforting and reassuring to him, and I noticed that he did start to make gentle grunting sounds that to me sounded like gestures of appreciation. Another thing I noticed about the animals was that he was extremely gaunt, and that worried me very much. There was no fat on his body, despite his chunky size. His bones were literally showing through the skin, like those half-starved dogs that you sometimes see on TV. I tried to act by going in and out of the trailer, making gestures to try and explain that I was coming back. He just looked at me with these big, round, scared eyes. I started to walk home because Sinbad appeared to have abandoned me. But I was wrong. Even though he had kept himself far away from the creature, he was waiting for me in a nearby field and came trotting up to me with his mouth chewing a bunch of delicious-looking grasses. I was so happy to see him because it meant getting back to the farm sooner. As my uncle farmed all kinds of animals, he had various kinds of antibiotics for animals and stuff like that. So I raided his medical supplies, looking for something that might help this animal. I found some antibiotics, some charcoal tablets, and something marked antiviral. I know I was being naughty and taking a risk, but I only cared about this poor animal. I even looked into our medicine cabinet for anti-inflammatories and stomach calms. Do not judge me too severely, because remember, I was very young at the time. The next day I returned to the creature and gave him a dose of charcoal tablets and gestured for him to drink them down. He watched me as I demonstrated the protocol and was intelligent enough to copy me. He did the same with the antivirals and antibiotics. I then tried to give him some bananas and a slice of toast that I had brought from home, along with a piece of boiled chicken and rice. I also brought him a couple of cans of Coca-Cola because I knew that was good for a bad tummy. Sadly, he showed absolutely no interest. He did not touch the food and winced again, clutching his stomach in agony. The next 2 days that followed the animal seemed to be getting worse, not better, and I was growing increasingly concerned. Maybe the medications were killing him, I thought in horror. The next day I made my way back to the Bigfoot creature and was expecting him to be worse than ever. I had made the decision that if he was not any better, I was going to have to involve my uncle and ask for his intervention, and I was not sure how he was going to react to this creature. and it could be unfavourable, I thought. Luckily, on this day, the Bigfoot was chattering away happily. I could see he had no energy because he was undernourished, but I noticed he had drunk all the Coca-Cola, eaten the bananas and chicken. I was so happy because I could see he was well on the way to getting better. I nursed the Bigfoot for several days after that, bringing him bananas, Cokes and chicken. He really loved that Coca-Cola. I've never seen anything drink as much Coke as he did. When I went back to see my Bigfoot friend, he had gone. There was no sign of him at all. I felt really sad that he had gone. I almost felt a loss, but I also felt happy because I knew he'd recovered from whatever had made him sick. So that was a huge relief. The next couple of months were uneventful at my uncle's farm, but I had so much fun playing in the fields and riding Sinbad. Then on one autumn day, Sinbad started playing up again. His ears went back and he bolted, leaving me standing alone in the field. I looked across towards the bank, which was covered with thick trees, but as there was a great deal of tree fall, I could see the outline of the 3 dark, shadowy figures in the clearing. I moved forward, standing about 30 yards away from the creatures. I could see 2 massive creatures. One was clearly a female because she had breasts, and the other was at least 2 feet taller than her. I think he was about 10 foot tall, and his chest area was enormous at 4 foot wide. He had very leathery, crinkly face with whiskers like an old man. He was also covered with grey hair that was almost turning white. His eyes looked at me with a keen interest, much like we would look at an unusual species at the zoo. I did feel like I was being studied, but I didn't mind. The female was younger and very slender, although strong and big. I would say she was about 7 feet tall, and her expression looked sombre and also contemplative. But the female was a tawny brown colour, and she was about 7 foot tall and about 3 feet wide across the chest. It was then that I saw the Bigfoot that I had nursed and called Coca, based on his love for Coca-Cola. I knew he recognized me because he was chattering excitedly to his parents. Nothing was said by any of us, as we all locked eyes and stared at each other. It was like a non-verbal communication, and I really believe they were thanking me. To this day, I do not know why I was not afraid. It was only years later that I discovered that this strange creature was a Bigfoot that many people are terrified of today. My uncle sadly passed away 20 years ago, but I do remember him mentioning once that his little Yorkshire Terrier just vanished one night, and they could not find him anywhere. They went out on a search party and called his name, and there was no response. He then told us that they woke up the following morning to find little Rufus on the bed, sleeping peacefully, although he did smell really horrible. He proceeded to tell me, "I do not know how that dog got in. There was only one open window that was 8 feet tall. How the heck could he have got through that? I will never know." I smiled to myself. Maybe Bigfoot was returning the favour, I thought, and I smiled. Well, that's the end of my story. I hope your listeners enjoyed it and are not too judgmental about me helping the hairy monster. Until next time, goodbye and good night.